Get the home field advantage every time with Fairfield by Marriott, official hotel partner of the NCAA. Whether you're a student athlete working toward your championship dreams or your team's biggest fan, Fairfield by Marriott has everything you need to get ready for game day. From comfortable guest rooms to complimentary hot breakfast, Fairfield is part of the Marriott Bonvoy portfolio of hotels and official hotel partner of the NCAA. Visit fairfield.marriott.com to book your next game day stay.
Life insurance. What's your excuse for putting it off? Can't afford it? Too much hassle? Think your work coverage is enough? There's a lot of excuses for putting off life insurance, but one big reason why you shouldn't. If the unexpected were to happen to you, who would pay the mortgage, the kids' tuition, and all the other bills? In a time of grief, the last thing you would want is for your family to have to sell the house and struggle to survive financially. At Ethos, we could get you covered in just 10 minutes and boom, family protected. Rates can increase the longer you wait, so no more excuses. Take 10 minutes today and discover the modern way to get the life insurance coverage you need. Ethos, fast and easy online term life insurance. Up to $2 million in coverage with no medical exam. Some policies as low as $1 a day. Answer a few health questions and get your free quote at ethoslife.com/audio. That's ethoslife.com/audio.
The mistletoe margarita, the Scrooge driver, the North Pole punch. The holidays call for cocktails, so get everything you'll need for them delivered with Drizzly, the go-to app for drink delivery. So
what's it gonna be?
Classics like Bullet Bourbon, Don Julio Reposado, or Kettle One, or maybe something new. Find it all on Drizzly, where you can get beer, wine, and spirits delivered for any holiday festivity. Download the Drizzly app or go to drizzly.com. That's DRIZLY.com today. Must be 21 plus, not available in all locations.
The United States Border Patrol has exciting and rewarding career opportunities with the nation's largest law enforcement organization.
Earn great pay with outstanding federal benefits and up to $20,000 in recruitment incentives. Learn more online at cbp.gov/careers/USBP.
Welcome into The Verge, a show which covers the Baltimore Orioles minor leagues. The Verge is part of BSL Radio. Baltimore Sports and Life is dedicated to analysis and discussion on the Orioles, Baltimore Ravens, and the University of Maryland. The site has a team of writers providing coverage of those teams and houses live streaming content weekly. Join the conversations at the message board, like BSL on Facebook, and follow BSL on Twitter.
Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. Ever since we discovered Spotify for Podcasters, we feel like having options like video podcasts and Q&A lets us be more creative on another level. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
Welcome on The Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Philon and Nick Stevens. And with the World Series and the 2022 Major League Baseball season in the books, we tonight bring back one of our time-honored traditions here on The Verge, which is our off-season predictions show. And for this episode, we're joined by a special guest. He is the host of Locked On Orioles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and making his second appearance on The Verge in the last 2 months. He is Connor Newcomb. Connor, how are you?
Yeah, I'm getting close to, if we've got any new listeners out there who've only been around for a couple months listening, it sounded like I'm the fourth co-host right now.
Connor's working over at Locked On Orioles. He's been on this show 4 times now since we started back in 2020, and we're happy to have him on tonight. And what we're going to take a look at is the offseason that could be really interesting for the Orioles. After an 83-79 finish, it seems like this could be the winter where we see the team spend, possibly reinforce the Major League roster with talent. But there's a first domino to fall in this offseason, and it's whether or not Jordan Lyles' $11 million club option will be exercised or declined? And I'm going to let Connor start with this one.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about it on my show a lot, and the hope is that for this offseason, a Jordan Lyles move is not like the end-all be-all like it turned into a little bit last year. I mean, he was the best player that the Orioles signed to a free agent deal last offseason. Obviously, we're hoping that's not the case. I don't know how much decline or picking up the option is really going to show us about what the O's are going to do the rest of the offseason, but I actually ended up predicting on the show last week that they're going to decline it. And I just think because of the amount of pitching they put together in-house this year, and I do think that there's a possibility of a trade and a free agent acquisition, not saying both would be ace-type players, but two guys who are probably better than Jordan Lyles in the long run. And I just think they'll use that $11 million elsewhere, potentially on a guy for $15 million who is much, much better than Jordan Lyles.
I kind of agree exactly with what Connor is saying, except I think they're going to pick it up as like insurance, because I think it's a 10 million option, or no, 11 million, something with the buyout being $1 million. It's going to cost the team an extra 10 million, I guess. Allows for 11 million. I feel like you can pick that up. You can go search the market, the free agent market, the trade market, and hope to find one or two guys better than him. And then if you do, you can flip him to a team that, is kind of like the Orioles in the last 2 years where they're desperate for innings. Yes, just like Vivek says, like Jose Iglesias, pick up that option and then trade him. Hopefully we can get a Gene Pinto. We love him over here. But I think worst case, you can't get a guy to sign to the terms you want, whatever reason no one wants to trade. You only get one, or can't even get anyone really big to come in, and you'll have Lyles there as a setback or a fallback option that hopefully you don't need.
Yeah, I guess I'm fine either way. But for this, I'll say, yeah, they do pick it up. I kind of agree with Connor's statement that I don't think they really need to, and I'm hoping that the moves they make later this offseason kind of make picking up Jordan Lyles' option null and void. But I'm going to say, yeah, they do. I think we really lucked out and got peak Jordan Lyles last season, which was fantastic. But I'm not expecting a repeat performance. But if he can be productive as like a number 5 or some sort of role, he's worth the money, because you already know he pitches well at Camden Yards. And then, the young arms on this team obviously learned a lot from him and have a ton of respect for him. So maybe his value was a little more than just on the field. And yeah, I say pick it up and then something happens, but he definitely doesn't finish the year with the Orioles.
I'll be fine with the move either way. And I've gone back and forth myself on whether or not I think it's going to happen, but ultimately I fall on the side that I think they're going to decline it, because they could probably spread that money around a little bit more between the raises they're projected to issue in arbitration, having to add to the rotation over the offseason, and probably add to the lineup in a couple of areas. So I think that $11 million, it's not a huge pot of money, or I guess really the $10 million will be a $1 million buyout. That $10 million is not a huge pot of money in the grand scheme of things, but it could help you leverage a deal somewhere else or another deal or two. So I think ultimately the Orioles are going to decline the option.
And right after that option is either picked up or declined, will the next big offseason move, or at any point this offseason, but will the Orioles sign Adley Rutschman to an extension this offseason? We'll start with Bob on this one.
I do think they will come to an agreement with Adley. I feel like he proved to be so important to the team already in just not even one full season. So you got to lock that guy up. He's going to be the cornerstone, the face of the franchise for the next 5 to 10 years at least. So I think it will happen. I think it'll be closer to spring training, if not during spring training. And I'm going to say it'll be like 7 or 8 years with some options, maybe mutual, maybe team, maybe player. But I think it'll be like 7 or 8 years, and it'll happen in 2023, but before the season starts.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say no, that it doesn't happen this offseason. That does not mean I think it's not going to happen, because they are going to extend Adley Rutschman. But I think this is maybe, I could potentially see it happening during the year next year, but I think most likely maybe this happens after next season. And this could have to do with the fact that maybe if you think the Orioles are expanding their payroll, but they're not exactly going to be Steve Cohen spenders or anything close to it this offseason, that, if they can get some guys in now, if they're upping the payroll, and then maybe to sell it to the Angelos family and be like, look, we're not going to up everything at once. we can give you one more year of incredibly cheap, all-star catcher while we pay a pitcher and an infielder. And then, you go do that extension next year. And will it be more expensive next year? Yes. But maybe that's a way to get a little more money to spend in free agency, because we just don't know how much D'Angelo's family is going to hand down to Mike Elias this offseason. It's a little concerning because they're fighting with each other right now. But I would say that by next offseason, it's going to happen. I just don't know if it will happen this offseason, so I'm going to say no.
I agree with Connor. I think it's going to happen, but if I had to guess if it's going to happen between now and spring training or even the start of the regular season, I'm going to say no. And where it comes down for me is, where is the urgency from either side? I have to imagine that it is there on the Orioles side to an extent, but if you're Adley Rutschman, are you really anxious to sign an extension right now when even a good 2 months to start next season could give you just a little bit more leverage? And the whole notion that players won't sign extensions during the season, I just don't think is entirely true. So I don't think you're necessarily looking at a situation where the window, at least for the next 10 months or whatever, shuts on February 1st because they couldn't get it done before the end of the offseason. So I don't think they get it done between now and spring training, but if I had to guess, I would say it's going to happen within the next 12 months or so.
I'm just going to ride the emotional wave here. You shocked the world last year. You've got the AL soon-to-be manager of the year in Brandon Hyde. This team overperformed expectations. I get that, but man, what a perfect start to the offseason it would be if you bring back Jordan Lyles and then you say, we've got the Adley extension. We lock him down. I just think, it'd be a fantastic way, like this whole liftoff thing that everybody's right. What does liftoff mean? Well, I think it could start with an Adley extension. But yeah, the business side of things, points that you guys are making do make a ton of sense. I don't know why Adley would want to sign right now, but you never know what's going on behind the scenes. So I'm going to stay optimistic and dream a little bit and say it's one of the first things done this offseason.
That would be amazing. And yeah, I mean, maybe the injury in spring training last year puts a little bit of fear and X factor in there that, hey, let me just get this locked up. But yeah, you guys are right. He doesn't necessarily have some big rush to try to sign this deal, but Julio Rodriguez did, and they're fighting it out for Rookie of the Year. So we'll see what happens. And I don't think the extension money would fall, the theoretical extension money would fall into this next question, but how much total money will the Orioles spend on free agents this offseason? Start with Zach.
A lot more than they did last year.
That's hard.
With that. If we're looking at total in terms of the full end contract lengths, I would say maybe somewhere north of $70 million. I'm thinking they get a pitcher, they get a free agent bat or two, where you're looking at probably some deals where they're backloaded a little bit in terms of their average annual value. So I would say somewhere north of $70 million total.
I'm going to go about double that. Again, good vibes. But I'm also assuming here that I'm going to say about like 140. I think that can get you two good quality starters. You're not shopping the Carlos Rodon, Jacob deGrom, obviously, but two good quality starters, maybe a cheap third veteran, especially if you don't bring Lyles back, but maybe a quality backup catcher. And then probably in my plan, it would be an outfielder, because I do think that someone gets moved, whether it's Santander or Hayes. One of them is gone. I think Mullen stays, but maybe even a utility infielder as well, like the Jace Peterson type. I don't think maybe it's not going to be your Carlos Correa or anything, but you get a Jace Peterson type player to help ease that transition with, as you try to figure out where does Gunnar play best, where do you put Westberg if he's still around, does Ortiz come up, Ramon Arias, is he still around? While you figure out all that infield headache that we talked about last week, I think Jace Peterson would be a good quality player to bring in, but yeah, throw around $140 million and let's see. I think that's kind of going to be way too much, even though I know a lot of fans are begging for the 140 just to go to one guy. We'll see.
My head does not agree with the prediction I'm about to make, but I would like to see it happen so much that I'm going to say it. I'm going to put like 180 million out there. And I'm going to say that prediction because I am holding strong the Orioles are going to sign one of the top four shortstops that are on the market. Xander Bogaerts opted out today, which means all four of those guys are going to hit free agency unless the Braves pull out one of these crazy extensions that they always get guys to sign in the next 2 days with Dansby Swanson. But it looks like all 4 of those shortstops are going to be out there. It's going to take a good chunk. I think the Orioles could work out a deal where maybe it's around, 130 to 150, depending on, how many years they'd like on that deal. Then you add a starting pitcher and, maybe the other moves around there are probably on the margins. But I could see the Orioles having, kind of an offseason where, they don't sign 7 free agents, but maybe it's 2 guys to at least show you're willing to spend the money and at least get this team closer to where they feel like they can get to the postseason. You add on waivers, you add the, the 1 year, $5 million guys around those 2 big pieces, the starter and the hitter. And, it's going to cost you. So $180 million. All
right. I'm going to say, I feel like $100 million would be a good over under if you're Vegas, but I'm going to say $115 million. I'm going to say they sign a starting pitcher like a Chris Bassett or a Nathan Eovaldi for like 3 years, $60 million. Some bat along the lines of Jock Peterson, Jose Abreu for like around 2 years of $40 million. A backup catcher, whether it's Roberto Perez or I don't know, Austin Hedges for 1 year, $5 million. And then another pitcher, whether it's a bounce back starting candidate / reliever for 2 years and $10 million, or a better reliever for 1 year and $10 million. That's how I would see them allocating that, but I'd be happy with that.
I'm going to go down a completely different path here, which is this is going to be the first offseason where we see the MLB draft lottery play out. And I'm going to try to guess now, starting with Nick, where will the Orioles land in the MLB draft lottery?
They will not get a top 6 pick. I don't know which website it was. It was like you can simulate it. I think I had to click it like 130 something times before, and the Orioles landed on number 2, but every other time it was number 17. But you look at, they're getting that extra pick for not signing the kid from Oklahoma State that they weren't able to get last year. That was kind of a bummer. But you're getting him. You're stacking the odds pretty high in your favor, I think, coming up in the next couple of drafts with the Rookie of the Year winners awards. So, and I just think that this team kind of was a little bit more risky in last year's draft, maybe in the later half of the draft process. But yeah, I think they're getting a little bit more risky with the draft process, which I like. So I don't mind it. This team's pretty good at, evaluating talent in the draft and developing these guys. So it's not going to be a top 6 pick, but for the crazy guys like us, I'm sure Vivek's going to be here as well. We'll have to bring him back on for some draft preview stuff. I think it's going to make covering next year's draft a little bit more fun, to be honest.
Yeah, I believe they have a 0.4% chance to get the number 1 pick, which would just be hilarious. I mean, if a Mike Elias team went out there, overperformed anything he thought was going to happen, even from the trade deadline on, as we saw from the initial comments, and then he still goes and gets the number 1 pick, I mean, he'd just be sitting pretty. But yeah, I mean, the way it works, if you don't get in that top 6, you're going to end up with, picking where your record is. So, the chances are so low because the Orioles won 83 games. So, I don't think they get in that top 6, but this is also a prediction where it's literally just luck. So I could throw a number out there and maybe it would stick, but I don't think they're picking in the top 6.
Yeah, we have a 3.4% chance to get a top 6 pick and a 2.3 or 2.2% chance to get 18th pick if Milwaukee gets a top 6 pick. So yeah, I'm going to play the odds and say we stick around 17. And yeah, that'll be interesting. Middle of the pack. A lot of names we'll have to learn more than just the top 5 or 6 or so in next year's draft.
Yeah, I'm going to say 17th as well because I did the same thing that Nick did, and I didn't even bother going beyond like the 50 or so clicks that it would take to have the Orioles land anywhere higher than 17th. So I think that they're going to pick 17th, but if the trends of last year's draft repeat themselves, there's still going to be a pretty good player or 2 available at that point in the draft. So definitely not something to worry about if you're concerned that the Orioles are going to start seeing their farm system wane in terms of what they can get out of the draft because they're winning.
Yeah, I think Prospects Live is already putting out lists. So if you're eager, you can go ahead and already start doing your research. But we'll go. Next question here is, how many trades do the Orioles make before opening day? We'll start with Zach on this one.
I'm going to go with 3, and I think 2 will fit the mold of trying to make the 2023 team better. And I think you will see 1 trade in there where they maybe move a guy who is basically deemed surplus, or that doesn't quite fit on the roster for this year, where they could get some value back. But I think you're going to see 3 trades over the offseason, and most of them will be to make the 2023 Major League roster better.
Yeah, I said 3 as well. And I kind of agree with the reasoning as well. I have us trading Lyles, obviously already got to stay consistent, pick up that option, get 2 better options in-house, and then trade Lyles for probably a couple international prospects or something like that. So I could see that happening. I could see 1 big trade, one eyeball opening trade for a Shane Bieber, Corbin Burns type, where we're really going after it, giving up some good prospects there. And then I could see, like you said, trying to move around some surplus, quote unquote surplus, for some combination of Austin Hayes, Ramon Urias, Keegan Aiken, and a prospect, and just bringing in a guy along similar value, but just in a position where they feel like it could help the team better.
Yeah, I was just looking up, just to go back to the last question. If the Orioles do pick 17th, the last 17th pick to end up with more than a cup of coffee in the big leagues was Tim Anderson in 2013. But I trust Mike Elias to draft well, but hopefully they end up a little higher than 17. But you can obviously still get a good player. Forrest Whitley was there. Evan White was there. They were good prospects, but we know how that's been turning out so far. But to the trades, I think they trade for a starting pitcher. I don't know if they can pull off the Shane Bieber heist that I've been talking about all offseason on my podcast so far. We will see if they can make that work. But I think even on the margins, sticking in Cleveland, like a guy like Aaron Savali, like I could see them going after a guy like that, where, a guy who's just about to hit arbitration on, one of these teams doesn't like to spend a lot, and, you can flip some guys there. I think we're still going to see, actually, Vivek asked me this question on a mailbag episode a couple weeks ago. I think we're going to see the similar to the Tanner Scott Cole Sulser trade, but maybe with just one guy. And I think it's going to be Cianel Perez. I do think that because he outperformed his expected stats so much, the Orioles may sell high on him. So there's a second trade. And I think there could be a third, 40-man roster crunch trade where, maybe it is a Ramon Urias being dealt, maybe for, 2 prospects who are not quite, don't have to be placed on the 40-man, or even a swap, that the Orioles could do if they feel like, hey, if we send, one of our hitting prospects who isn't, quite on a starting track just yet, but maybe somebody feels like they can fix him a little bit. Like maybe it's a Yusniel Diaz for a, high spin rate pitcher, like kind of similar to the Yastrzemski for Tyler Erb trade, but one that actually works out a little better for the Orioles. So I'm going to say 3.
Let's package Yusniel Diaz and Keegan Aiken. What can we get for that? Colorado, what's up? I think I said 3 as well. I could see as many as 5. But again, some of those really small, fringy trades you'll see in the winter meetings or something. But I want to say either an outfielder and or Ramon Urias goes, whether it's Santander, Hayes, Mullins, or Urias, or although I think Mullins would be the lowest odds there. I think one of them probably leaves. A reliever, I think, does get moved. I agree with that as well. I said from the Perez, Baker, Aiken, Tate group, just because, again, especially if the organization views one of those guys as a definite overperformer, why not sell high? I banged that drum all year last year about selling Tanner Scott earlier and all this stuff, and they waited. But maybe you're able to sell high with a guy. We know trades are difficult to make, but and then I do think we see a notable trade on the prospect front. Maybe not the blockbuster quite yet, but you start to see some of these guys, whether it's a Cesar Prieto type move, there's the glut of middle infielders. Some of the outfielders, I think you're starting to see a backlog in the upper levels of the minor league a little bit. So if you can move one of those guys who's still got a little bit of ceiling, I think maybe some sort of a package there is achieved.
All right, so Vivek's going to get more mentions on this podcast than Mike Elias himself, because we're going to talk about the Rule 5 draft here, his favorite. Do you think, obviously, this team has been in love with the Rule 5 draft even before Elias, Duquette, McPhail? This team has loved the Rule 5 draft, but as we're hoping to compete starting next year, is there room for a Rule 5 pick on next year's team? Start with Connor.
Yeah, I think they're going to have at least one open spot when we get to, the Rule 5 draft. And it'll be interesting for the Orioles this year because, the draft is always during the winter meetings, and that's when some other moves can be made. The Orioles really haven't been busy during the winter meeting the last couple of years, so they're basically just geared up for, have at least 2 spots open on the 40-man that they can use. Well, those spots might get filled elsewhere during the winter meetings, but I do think they're going to go into the Rule 5 draft with at least one spot open. And if they draft somebody and 2 weeks later they make a signing and that guy gets sent back to his original team, I wouldn't be super surprised if that happens. But I think they're going to at least take a shot on somebody. I'm really interested to see how the cancellation of the draft from last year impacts what the prospect pool looks like this year. Because just if you look at, the guys the Orioles decided not to protect, the 2 big names we talked about were Newstrom and Vespi. Well, Vespi, at least has a solid up and down year. He's still on the 40-man. I don't see him getting DFA'd. And Newstrom, his stock went way down. I don't think anybody's going to be picking him up in the Rule 5 draft. So it'll be really interesting to see how that canceled year impacts these guys. But whether it's a catcher type or just your general, relief / maybe fringe starter guy, I think the O's will certainly pick someone, whether it's Duquette or it's Elias. They love to find some value there.
Yeah, you got to leave spot for at least one. I mean, you're going to take a gander on the pool, see what's there. Stay tuned. I'm sure we're going to have a big preview episode. It's a fun process just to dig deep on guys you otherwise wouldn't. And so it's fun to look around the Major League rosters right now and see where the 40-man rosters, non-40-man rosters, see who could be available. But you look at the roster right now, Santander and Tyler Wells, you find that you see the success the Orioles have had with some of these guys. You're going to leave a spot open and see. And you don't have to use it. You can skip the pick or just take the guy. And like Connor said, you take the guy and then you sign somebody else, you make a trade, and then you go ahead and send them back. And you lose, $20,000 or something like that? Nothing big. So, yeah, it's Rule 5 in Baltimore. It's a time-honored tradition that I love.
Yeah, they're going to take someone. I mean, think of it as basically making a waiver claim. I mean, it's not exactly the same, but I think that the Orioles are, even as they, add to the Major League roster in hopes of winning now, I still think that adding to the margins of the roster wherever you can for as cheaply as possible is going to be part of their formula. So the Rule 5 draft fits into that. That doesn't mean that I think whoever they end up taking with that pick is going to stick on the opening day roster. In fact, that the odds probably will be against them going into spring training. But I would be very surprised if they don't take someone and they don't leave a spot or 2 open going into the Rule 5 draft.
Yeah, I could waste my bold prediction and say they're not going to take someone, but I also agree they will take someone. And yeah, they'll probably be returned before the end of spring training. But hey, it's a chance to bring someone in, hope something clicks, or maybe you can make a change or 2 to really get them to show something beyond what they have shown so far. So it doesn't hurt. It's only $25,000. While that would wreck me financially, it's not going to hurt the Orioles whatsoever.
We'll move on now to the outfield situation. Will any of Anthony Santander, Cedric Mullins, or Austin Hayes be traded? If so, which one or which players, if you are inclined to say that more than one would be moved? And I'll start with Bob here.
Of course you will. I would like to say it would just be Austin Hayes. I'm starting to think if we're going to make a trade for a Corbin Burns, you saw the Brewers are saying, hey, we were going to be very active this winter. Shane Bieber, maybe Mullins is a key part in that trade, so you don't have to dip into too many of your prospects. Obviously, I think to get one of those guys, it had to be Mullins plus somebody in your top 15 prospects, maybe even Hayes and Mullins go. But I do think one of them will go. If I have to finally just give an official answer, I'm going to say Mullins because I'll probably be the only one that says that.
All right. I'm going to say Austin Hayes again. I'm going to keep beating this drum. He's fallen out of favor with me. I kind of hope that the Santander trade talks kind of cool a little bit. I'm perfectly fine with keeping him around, keeping that bat. Talked about last week how I know he doesn't like it, but if you have to move him like first base DH and keep him in that rotation with some part-time outfield play, I think that would be probably best. Get him the most at bats, the most playing time, but I want that bat in the middle of the lineup. He finally broke out last year. We saw exactly what he's capable of, and I think there might even be just a touch more left. So yeah, I don't see Cedric Mullins would be tough. I'm not on like if he's traded, fine. But if he stays, I'm going to love it. I think he is able to turn things around a little bit next year. But Austin Hayes, I don't see where that ceiling is with him anymore. It's 2 straight years where he's been relatively healthy, and he's been essentially not much more than a league average hitter, I think. So if you can find a trade partner, someone who thinks you can turn him around, move him.
I'm going to say none of them get dealt. I was on the train of Santander being traded at some point, but I think he went to an extra level power-wise this year and showed, he revamped his swing a little bit, his approach a little bit, his body a little bit, and he lost some defensive ability, but he almost touched 35 homers on a team that lost some power in general just because of the wall being moved back and guys, going into some offensive slumps. So I think they keep him around. I mean, he's only going to be about $7 million in arbitration. For a guy who produced that well, that is an easy yes to bring him back. For Cedric Mullins, we know this is going to continue to be trade rumors. I think we're past the point of trading Mullins for prospects. They would have done that. They would have done it last offseason. If it's a Mullins trade, it better be for the big-time ace, and I just don't know if they're going to be able to swing that. And I love Cedric Mullins, and that's a hard guy to replace, the kind of value he brings you. And I just think for Austin Hayes, right now, after how he ended the year, even as like a throw-in to a deal, I don't know how much value he provides to another team because he's hitting arbitration now. So it's not even like he's still, on the minimum contract where you can figure things out. And he was abysmal for the final, 3+ months of the year. He's a worse defender than I think people used to think. He still has a great throwing arm, but he doesn't quite, patrol the outfield like he did as a prospect and as a very young player when he came in center field. And, all the tools are just not what we thought they would be. So I almost think for the Orioles, they are best set to just hold on to him. I mean, he's going to get $1.5 to $2 million in arbitration. If it's a Stowers and Hayes platoon for a while in the outfield, I mean, you maybe try that with Santander, Mullins, and somebody else at DH, or you bring in an outfielder and Santander's your DH. I just think he's the most likely, but his value really isn't there for another team to even want him added onto a deal.
If I can just add on to the Santander love, because, I mean, this guy, if you look at Baseball Savant, the power just seems like it really took off. And he's one of the few guys that was here in the majors when the new hitting coaches came in, when the swing decisions came in, and it seemed to actually help him quite a bit with his walk rate going up significantly. But Baseball Savant has him. If he played his games in Cincinnati, he would have had 46 home runs. If he was in Texas, 45, Los Angeles Angels, 44, Colorado, 44. So the power was real. And if anything, I think the 31 that he hit, or I don't know, he hit 33, whatever. It seems like the Orioles park was like one of the worst parks for him to hit in as far as his profile with the power. So keep him around. I don't really want him in the outfield too much. I think he would be great as the Trey Mancini role at the beginning of 2022, where he's DHing. Maybe he can learn to play a little bit of first base, can play outfield in a pinch. But yeah, I'm all aboard. Keep Santander around, train.
Yeah, this is another question that I struggle with, and I wrote it so that I could watch everyone else struggle with it before I had to struggle with it. I think that Mullins is not going to be traded because ultimately the middle ground between 2022, which was still an okay year, but not as good as 2021, that middle ground is still going to be hard to replace. A 4.5 to 5 win center fielder who does a little bit of everything, that's going to be really hard to replace. So I don't think he's moved. I think Santander stays because it's going to be harder than it looks to make up for that loss of power. I will just go ahead and say that I think Hayes is traded, and I know that it's going to be really hard. I agree with everything that Connor said about his value and it being hard to find a fit for him. What I do question, though, is could you find a team that maybe looks at Austin Hayes and thinks, bring him into a ballpark where he could hit for a little bit more power and see what he can do over half a season and then flip him to get back some prospects. That's probably where Hayes' value is. Could you get someone to buy a little high on him next July? Or could he just be, for the next year or two, the serviceable stopgap for you at a corner outfield spot until you're ready to find somebody better? So I think he's moved, but I don't think that there is an obvious fit.
Colorado, baby. Or Cincinnati. They're rebuilding.
Real quick for anybody, really. I saw some talk about this on Twitter. Any thought of Hayes possibly being non-tendered?
I don't think so, only because the number is so low. It's projected, I believe, at $1.8 million by MLB Trade Rumors. I can't see it being any more than $2 million that they have to pay for Austin Hayes. And if you're a competing team, even if Austin Hayes is like a platoon outfielder, that usually costs you more than $2 million. And Vivek made a good point in the chat. I mean, he's still, worth almost 2 wins, and he still gives you something in the outfield. And he's still a valuable player to have on the team, even if he's in a part-time role. And for $2 million, I just don't think it's there yet. Now, if he was set to make like a Santander amount, 7 to 10 million, and he had performed like that, I think that would be a real conversation we'd be having. But at 2, it's worth it to just pick it up and deploy your options.
Yeah,
I agree.
Be interesting to see this. I just want this offseason to get rolling now. So let's get some actual moves to talk about. Speaking of, what is your boldest Orioles-related prediction for this offseason? Start with Bob.
I have 2. My first one is the O's don't trade a top 10 prospect this offseason, just because if anything with these prediction shows, you got to be consistent. So if Mullins is going to be a big part of the quote-unquote big trade that I'm predicting we're going to make, then I don't necessarily know if you're going to need to take anyone else from the top 10. Maybe you can get away with a guy 11 to 15 or a couple guys in that level to complete that deal. And I think with the depth that they've accumulated, that they can still get some deals done with some lower level guys like Darryl Hernaiz, and I'd love to see him stick around, but you have to trade somebody. But there's other ways that they can get around that. And then my second bold prediction is that the Orioles will re-enter the Asian market this offseason, whether it's the pitcher Koda Senge, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it, or that position player that played with, I think it was Ha-Seong Kim. I would like to see them dip their toes back into that market.
I'm going to say that Ramon Urias and Jorge Mateo both make it through the offseason with the Orioles. I don't think either one has moved. I think that what will happen is, in my scenario where Austin Hayes is traded, that's going to open up a spot somewhere for them. And I think Urias and Mateo are complementary players to each other. They don't really fill the same role. And I think that if the Orioles do trade from that prospect depth this offseason, it's going to be upper-level middle infielder, which means there's going to be one less player at the AAA level knocking on the door of the majors early next year. So at that point, Urias as your third baseman and second baseman, Mateo as your shortstop and second baseman, who you can put into the outfield on occasion, have bench roles.
I think I already alluded to mine a little bit, and John was in the comments there, but I'm going to expand it just a bit to not bottle myself to one player. Either Carlos Correa, Trey Turner, or Xander Bogaerts is in an Orioles uniform on opening day next year. I just think with the class that is there of the shortstops, yes, the Orioles have Jordan Westburg almost ready. Yes, Gunnar Henderson is there, but if they are trying to win, and again, paying for this player is not just a 2023 move. You're going to have to give this guy, whoever it is, 5 to 6 years at least on the contract. So, Jordan Westburg, if he hits, he's going to fit. He's going to be in the big leagues. He's going to fit on the team, or you're going to trade him for an ace starting pitcher. So I do think that one of those guys is going to end up in an Orioles uniform. I don't think it's as much as, the talk from one kind of random source we saw on the Orioles and Correa last offseason. I think this is where the liftoff comes for Mike Elias. And I honestly would be fine with any of those three guys. I don't think it's going to be Dansby Swanson. I honestly think he could be back in Atlanta, but I think any of the other three each bring, great all-star qualities, would each fit right in the middle, or in Turner's case, maybe at the top of this Orioles order. All of them have their question marks defensively, although Bogart's got a lot better this year. But when you have Mateo and Henderson already on the left side, you could play those guys at second base and figure it out. And it just makes this offense, which is the thing that in September held the Orioles back, makes it so much better.
I would love that.
I like it as well. My bold, I think I kind of alluded to this last week, but I'm going to say the Orioles and Brewers make a blockbuster trade. If I'm going bold here, I just think the Brewers, they've got new leadership. I don't see them punting on 2023, but maybe pushing things back maybe by a year while they try to figure out this roster and exactly where they want to go. They've got so many guys in arbitration or entering arbitration, and we know they're not like a top of the market team that's going to spend millions and millions and millions of dollars on all their talent. They're going to move somebody big. That Christian Yelich contract is still in the books for I don't know how much longer, but I know it's still there and it's beefy. So I think they move at least one major piece, one of their big starters. And we know the Orioles have the pieces to acquire pretty much anyone they want. They have the payroll flexibility, the money, and the prospect capital to do literally anything they want. So I'm hoping I would not be mad if they got one of Milwaukee's big arms.
Yeah, I think we saw Dean Kramer loves watching Corbin Burns pitch. Hey, bring him in and learn from him right in-house. That'd be amazing. But all right, we did bold predictions for the Orioles. Now let's just go with the boldest prediction for MLB as a whole over this offseason. Start with Nick.
I just
big MLB fan here. Giving the lead off.
I'm gonna say Jacob deGrom signs with the Rangers.
Okay.
Don't know why, but I'm just gonna go with that as my bold prediction.
Yeah, I think actually, I don't know how bold this is, but I think this will kind of shake up, how you're looking at things. I'll give two because this one's maybe not as bold, but Clayton Kershaw will finally pitch in not a Dodgers uniform. I think this is the year that he maybe goes to Texas, goes home to the Rangers. I don't think they're going DeGrom, but I think they're going to get Kershaw to add to John Gray and maybe try and look a little better than they did last year after winning the offseason. But I will say the other bold prediction is, I think this kind of goes along with Nick. I don't know exactly who it's going to be, but some team is going to sell off a star or two, and it's going to leave you shocked that, they were like, oh, this team was supposed to compete. What are they doing? It's going to be like the Reds almost making the playoffs and then completely selling off everyone, but worse. I think the Brewers kind of fit that mold, and I don't know if it's going to be to the Orioles, but I think you could see a massive fire sale in maybe a team like Milwaukee. You look elsewhere, maybe a team like Cleveland could fit that mold just because of how they've operated in the past. But I think there's going to be a weird offseason like that where you look at a team and saying you're a perennial playoff team and they just tear it all down.
I'm going to kind of build off of what Nick said. I'm going to predict that the Rangers sign 2 top 20 free agents this offseason because I feel like they have put themselves into a spot, but that's really all they can do because they spent so much money last offseason and they weren't really fully in rebuild mode, but weren't really in buying mode before that either. So, now they're bringing in Bruce Bochy as manager. They've had to change the top in baseball operations. They have this new ballpark, which is only going to be new for so much longer. So I think that they spend big again this offseason. And I think that we're going to be here within the next couple of months trying to figure out why the Colorado Rockies just spent 9 figures on a free agent. I just have this sense that it's going to happen. They will commit a sizable contract to a player that we don't see them signing right now. We're not going to understand why they did it. They won't make any moves towards a rebuild, but they won't make a lot of other great moves around that sizable commitment to get better for next year. So I think kind of like with Chris Bryant last year, like why did they do that? I think we're going to be questioning that again with the Rockies this offseason.
Questioning the Rockies. Is that really that bold, Zach? Come on.
No, it's really not. I'll concede it's not that bold.
I went with Aaron Judge not returning to the Yankees. Whether it's the Rangers, the Mets, the Giants, he will sign elsewhere. And the boldness comes from Yankees Twitter melting down or Yankees fandom melting down, and Brian Cashman is fired for not getting the deal done.
I wanted to say Shohei Ohtani to the Dodgers, but like right before we came on, I think Perry Manassian came out and like an idiot that he is said, we're not trading him. So there went that one.
That means Mike Trout's getting traded instead.
We're going to take some listener questions in a moment, some of which are kind of along the lines of predictions. But first, NFL Sundays are only getting better, and so are the incredible offers of DraftKings Sportsbook, an official betting partner of the NFL. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 on any NFL team to win and get $200 in free bets if they do. Check this out. Right now, everyone can earn up to 100% boost with DraftKings stepped-up same-game parlays. Go to the DraftKings Sports app, place a same-game parlay, and combine multiple bets like which team will win, player props, and point totals. Do you think the Baltimore Ravens can take down New Orleans Saints on Monday Night Football? Will Isaiah likely step up in the absence of Mark Andrews? Head over to DraftKings now and place the same game parlay of Ravens on the money line, like anytime touchdown scorer and likely over 34.5 receiving yards for plus 390 odds, and watch the money roll in while you enjoy Monday Night Football. With bigger payouts than ever, DraftKings Sportsbook is my go-to when betting on the NFL. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now using promo code on the Verge and place a $500 pregame moneyline bet to get $200 in free bets if your team wins. Only at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, with code on the Verge. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. See show notes for details. And we'll go in now to a listener question that kind of fits into the predictions mold that we've been following for the rest of this episode. And this comes from Kevin Brown. Would you rather have Anthony Rizzo, Trey Mancini, or JD Martinez? And I'm going to start with Connor here.
Those are three very different players in the way that they help you. Obviously, they're basically all first base / DH types. I mean, JD Martinez would be just a DH. But I mean, if I could pick any of the three, I would take Anthony Rizzo right now. I think in terms of age and what he gives you, he's the best player. Now, I know he had a down year for the Yankees, but he still opted out of his contract. He's a left-handed hitter who I think could just completely pepper right field at Camden Yards. Yeah, you would want to play him at first base. And yeah, Ryan Mountcastle had a great defensive year, but you could basically do what you were doing with Ryan and Trey early in the year. They just kind of switch off DHing and playing first base. Do I think the Orioles are going to pursue him? I really don't. I think if they go after a DH type, it would be a guy who probably also plays the outfield instead of also just plays first base. But he's, Rizzo's younger than Martinez. JD Martinez still has the doubles, but the power kind of went away this year. And I love Trey Mancini, but he's probably the third best player of that group. So give me Anthony Rizzo.
Yeah, I like all of these guys to one extent or another, but I'd probably rank JD Martinez one narrowly over Anthony Rizzo, just because I feel like, we struggled. At least it felt like we struggled against lefties towards the end of the year, at the very least. So get a lefty masher in there. Even if it's doubles with the new wall, it doesn't hurt to have someone like that at DH. Rizzo, you can split him and Mountcastle at first base and get good defense either way. Lefty, righty bat combination. Mancini, be a great story if we could get him back and he could rebound to the levels he had in the first half of 2022 and 2021. Then, yeah, but I think just going up against those guys is pretty tough.
Yeah, I don't think that the Orioles go after either of those guys, but if I had to pick one, I'm going Rizzo as well. Just big barrel and hard hit rate numbers. Those are two numbers the Orioles like. The BABIP was also extremely low with Rizzo last year, so maybe a little bit of bad luck. You ban the shift. Maybe all of that combines, helps him out a little bit more. You see the uptick in production, he gets on base. But, yeah, we'll see. I think there was a conversation I had about JD Martinez at our live show with some people, and I didn't hear that conversation firsthand, but I got the vibe that the Orioles are nowhere near thinking about JD Martinez, bringing him into the organization. I don't think there are a lot of fans of JD, but...
Yeah, I would be surprised if any of those three end up with the Orioles. If I had to take one, I would take Rizzo for all the reasons that Connor and Nick mentioned. I think that the batting average and some of the stats that go with that will go up a little bit next year with the shift being banned. And I would be the most confident in his bat translating into power production at Camden Yards at this point. But I would be really surprised if the Orioles add a bat in that first base DH area. I think if they add a bat, it's going to be somewhere in the infield and or at one of the corner outfield spots. And if the Orioles were to go down the road of trades, and we have a few questions like that here, and I'll start with one from Corey. Which top 10 prospect would you be most comfortable trading, and which would you least be comfortable trading? And he says that he's thinking guys outside the Grayson Rodriguez, Gunnar Henderson tier. And then he wants to know on top of that, which prospect is the most likely to be traded, and would you be okay with it? So I'll start with Bob here. But although you just said that you don't see a top 10 guy going, so I want to be curious to see where your answer is here.
So at least it's not saying, I don't know. I'm sure I'll contradict myself one way or another on the show, but I'll start with most likely to be traded. I do think it's Cesar Prieto, just because I feel like he's fallen behind a little bit on the middle infield depth chart, and he's at the Arizona Fall League. Maybe a team sees something they like in him, and the Orioles get an offer that they are willing to trade there. And as far as most comfortable, least comfortable, I'd be least comfortable trading Colton Cowser, just because I feel like at the top of the minors for the Orioles right now, I don't think there's really anyone other than Cowser that could just step in early next year. And maybe, if there's an injury to Mullins, I feel like you could call Cowser up. And while he's going to take some adjusting to the major leagues, of course, and he's still, got a ways to go, I feel like he is a caliber that could step in and fill a role kind of like the Braves, Michael, I can't remember his name. It's been too long since the season was on. The rookie for the Braves did for center field for them. And most comfortable, I would say Jordan Westberg, just because I feel like Ramon Arias could fill that role as a, guy that is the DJ LeMahieu of the Orioles, who just bounces around, gets at bats all over the place when needed, and has some power. And yes, Michael Harris, thank you in the chat. And I feel like Westberg is going to be just a cheaper, younger Ramon Arias. So that's what I said.
As far as like top 10 prospect, most comfortable trading, honestly, at this point, anyone and everyone can go. Not everyone, obviously. Some of these guys are going to pan out, but obviously you're going to keep Gunnar Henderson. You're going to keep Grayson Rodriguez. I think those are two of your cornerstones of this franchise. Jackson Holiday, you don't trade him yet, right? They just drafted him. He was a high school pick. Let's wait. Give it a little bit of time. Let him develop here in this organization. But honestly, I love all these guys on this list. I think Kobe Mayo would hurt the most. I think personally, I've mentioned that a couple of times before. Him and Joey Ortiz are the two guys that I'm highest on and just personal love for. But honestly, I think I've said this before as well. When I started watching the playoffs and you see Seattle, Luis Castillo going out there dealing for Seattle, and it's I want that for the Orioles. This team can go out and get anybody they want. And honestly, I'm ready for it. So I'm comfortable trading anybody you want to trade outside of Grayson Rodriguez, Gunnar Henderson. You want to trade DL Hall? Honestly, if you think you can do better and you're not high on him, trade him. I'm fine with that as well, even though he's a starter next year. But as far as the top 10 prospect list goes, if you're going to get a good haul for it, make the move.
I'm going to have people probably turn against me with this answer. I'm going to start with I'd be most okay with them trading. And I'm going to say Jackson Holiday. And I'm going to say that because he's the furthest from the big leagues of all the top 10 prospects. So even though he was the number one overall pick, and I think he's going to be an amazing player in the big leagues, we kind of know the least about him. I mean, all we've seen him do is play against high school competition. I mean, he's 18 years old. And I can only imagine what the Orioles could get back if they dealt last year's number one overall pick. So that's what I'm going to say, because I think the O's are ready to compete. And the earliest he could be in the big leagues, you'd have to think is 2025. So that's why that's my answer. The player in the top 10, I would least like them to trade away. You said no Gunnar and no Grayson for this answer. I'm going to say Heston Kjerstad. And I'm going to say that because it is awesome watching what he's doing right now in the Arizona Fall League. It is awesome seeing him get back to the player he was at Arkansas before he got sick. And I do think he is now the player again that the Orioles saw when they took him at number 2. And for one thing, I think he would play perfectly at Camden Yards. And on the other hand, I just want the cool story of his debut coming with the Orioles and not coming with another team. The most likely guy to be dealt, if we're going by what would be a Fangraphs top 10 list right now, that would include Joey Ortiz. I think he's the most likely to be dealt because there's probably nobody else in this system with more helium than Joey Ortiz right now with the season he had. And especially when you compare what the O's or other teams probably thought of him before this season to after this season, there's probably no bigger difference and no bigger increase in the O's system. And I still think there's more question marks about Ortiz's bat than there is about guys like Westberg, even though what he did late in the year, he's still going to be maybe seen as that glove first guy. But if another team super buys into what he did this season, you could sell high on him and get a solid major league piece.
I mean, Jackson's dad is now with the Cardinals, so I mean the pieces are falling in place there for that prediction there.
I think.
What was it, Jack Flaherty you wanted back?
Yes, that was mostly tongue in cheek, but
yeah,
people took it seriously. But if it's Jack Flaherty and one of those young hitters that they can't get on the field, Jack Flaherty and Nolan Gorman and somebody else for Jackson Holiday, let's make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to say that out of the top 10, the players that I would be the most comfortable moving, I think are also the most likely, and it's one of Jordan Westburg or Connor Norby, because I think that either would fill the same role in the major leagues right now, which is at a minimum part-time second baseman during the season, maybe full-time by the end of the year. I think Westburg might have a higher ceiling of the two, but that Norby has raised his floor and his ceiling so much in the last year that it's actually pretty close between them now. And that's not something I would have said coming into this past season. And I think that they would also be the ones I would be the most okay with, because that's where you have depth. You have Darryl Hernandez down in the minor leagues. You have Jackson Holiday with middle infielders. And you also still have guys like, and although I don't think he's a shortstop, a Frederick Ben Cosme, who could, in theory, stick at second base, that has some helium right now, has played really well. So I think the Orioles will continue to make that a priority, and the depth behind those two guys is pretty strong. I'll go to a question now, which is kind of the flip side of that. What prospects would make you the most angry if the Orioles traded them? And I'll start with Nick here.
Yeah, I think right now it makes a ton of sense if you want to package Kobe Mayo or use Kobe Mayo to highlight a trade package, because I think a lot of the industry is already the people who I respect the most in the industry have been high on Mayo coming out of the draft. And then shout out to even our own former colleague there, Stephen Loftus, who sold me greatly on Kobe Mayo after the draft. But it makes a lot of sense if you want to use Mayo to highlight a trade package because of that ceiling. But I just think right now that ceiling is so enormous, and I want to see what the Orioles are able to do with it. Like I just said, I'm fine with anybody getting moved because this is part of using your minor league system, using this prospect depth. But that one I think would hurt me personally the most for a little bit.
Yeah, Mayo is up there for me, but for me, it's Joey Ortiz. I just would love that story of, this is Matt Blood's guy. This is the guy that runs our minor leagues, that is, leading the way on this player development. And this has been his guy, and he's been, hyping him up for a while. And just the story of, coming back from that injury and having that second half of last year. He's a guy that can play anywhere on the infield, at least probably could play the outfield too at an elite level defensively. And I don't know. I would just love to see, even if he's just a role player, I want to see him get a ring with the Orioles when they finally win the World Series in the next few years.
I'll give two names, Seth Johnson and Chase McDermott, because if you're trading Trey Mancini, you better be sure that those two guys coming back are going to help you big time at the major league level. And I really do think that, as long as Tommy John doesn't go horribly for Seth Johnson, he's going to be a really good pitcher in the big leagues. But if they turned around and flipped those guys immediately and it didn't turn into, even better big league talent right now, I would not be a happy camper.
I would say Joey Ortiz would probably make me the most upset at this point, just because I'm so confident in his ability to play shortstop at a high level defensively at the major league level, that even if he only tops out at, let's say, 12 to 15 home runs in a given season, he's going to give you a lot of value on defense. Another guy that I would throw in there too is Cade Povich, because I think he's kind of only scratched the surface of what he can accomplish. And he was on your show, Connor, and I believe he said he has not really gotten into making a lot of adjustments yet. That's correct, right?
Yeah, and he kind of almost hadn't settled in yet, even when I talked to him, and it had been like almost a month since the trade.
Yeah, so that's a guy I would not want to see the Orioles move, just because he had a nice bump over the course of last season, tailed off a little bit towards the end at Bowie. But I think that he's only really scratching the surface of what he's capable of, and I wouldn't want to see the Orioles move too quickly on him, especially when he's not stuck in a 40-man roster crunch. So we'll go to a question here from Vivek, which is, given how the Orioles in 2022 overachieved our expectations, to what areas do you expect to see some regression? I'll start with Bob.
I got to take the easy answer and just say the bullpen. and not necessarily Felix Bautista, Dylan Tate. I feel like those guys are pretty locked in. I even see Brian Baker having a better year and kind of coming into his own next year. But as Connor had talked about, Cionel Perez, still think he'll be a good pitcher if he's around next year, but definitely overpitched, like his ability, maybe not ability, but just his peripherals. And I feel like along the margins, long relief and middle relief, you might see some regression because, man, that bullpen was pretty much lights out top to bottom last year. So, you could say starting pitching, but I just feel like they're going to bring in guys that are going to help offset some of that regression.
I just said pitching, copped out there, which is why I'm cool with bringing Lyles back, but also getting 2, maybe even 3 quality arms via free agency and trade. Yeah, I just think, the bullpen was great. We can't expect all of those arms to repeat their seasons. We still don't know who DL Hall, Dean Kramer, and Kyle Bradish are as major league starters. Hopefully at least one pans out as a legitimate full-time starter on this roster, but we saw a lot of fantastic development among the pitchers, but I think regression in this area among a key arm or 2 is what scares me the most entering next season.
There's not a lot of guys on offense who can really heavily regress unless I think Adley Rutschman's going to do so, which I don't. I'm going to say specifically the fringe level pitchers, the guys who were the back end of the rotation, whether if they bring Jordan Lyles back, if a guy like a Spencer Watkins gets another chance, and then the Keegan Aikens of the world, if Joey Crable comes back, although we kind of saw the regression happening during the season, I kind of don't think he's going to be back. Some of those guys who really in the first half of the season, helped the Orioles stay afloat with the innings that they gave them. I think that's why you're going to have to add at the top pitching wise, because if instead of Spencer Watkins in that role, you have a Tyler Wells or a Dean Kramer in that number 5 role, then you're in a much better spot moving forward. I just think they had a lot of kind of fringe guys, even the Austin Voths of the world as well, who just pitched well over their head this year, and you can't count on that happening back-to-back seasons.
Yeah, I agree with you, Connor. I think it's specifically in that area of pitching, and I want to make sure I stay consistent with our next question, which is, do you think we finish top 10 ERA next year? That comes from Yoni, and I'll let Connor start with this one.
I would say no, just because you don't have to make the playoffs. Now, it's going to help the stadium the O's are playing in, but I believe they were still 19th or 20th this year that they finished. You can still get an improvement without finishing in the top 10. I think the starters will improve. I think the bullpen could take a little bit of a mild step back just because I don't think they're going to, add to it in free agency. They're going to rely on waiver claims, and some guys pitched out of their minds in 2022 to help the Orioles get to a winning record. So I could say, I think they could still finish in the top half of the league, but it's tough to get in the top 10 because, unless the O's make that huge splash trade, they're still not going to have a true ace. Even if we think Grayrod is going to be that guy, he's not going to be that when he just gets to the major leagues. I don't think. It'd be awesome if he was, but they're still not going to have that top of the rotation guy that at least 10 teams have. And so I'll say they'll finish outside the top 10.
I'm an eternal optimist, so I said yes. And that's because I have them signing a Chris Bassett or a Kodai Senga combined with trading for a Shane Bieber / Corbin Burns. And then you get John Means back halfway. Grayson Rodriguez makes his major league debut and dominates right away, obviously. So, yeah, I'm going to say yes.
I'm going to say no, only because I'm just so hesitant with so many of the young pitchers. I got to, even Dean Kramer, I'm still you got to show me again next year. I love all the development that took place. I love the steps forward. Kyle Bradish, obviously a huge fan of Kyle Bradish. I think he's the guy that I'm highest on among all of the pitchers that were already in the major leagues right now. But yeah, Rodriguez might struggle a little bit. Some of these other rookies that come up are going to struggle a little bit. And so I think, like Connor said, you don't need to finish in the top 10. You can still see progression take place. You can also see guys struggle. It's all going to balance out, and they can still be a playoff team.
Yeah, I agree. I could see a scenario where maybe you see the pitching staff finish in the top 10 of some categories, but not really the major ones that we're looking at for evaluating top 10. I think it's more likely that between some improvements over last season from existing players and any additions you make, that the Orioles get to the playoffs with a top 7, top 5 offense and maybe a top 12 pitching staff would kind of be where I go, maybe even top 14. I think that's more likely than finishing in the top 10 of ERA. And I'll go to another question from Vivek here, which is, who makes the Gunnar Henderson ascent in 2023 from the minors? And I will let Nick start with this one.
I wanted to say Joey Ortiz, but there's been a lot of Joey Ortiz talk already tonight. So I'm going to switch it up and say Judd Fabian. I think he had a monster debut last year in this organization. I think there are a lot of people out there who are extremely high on Fabian. And you look at some of the more advanced numbers that I would pay a lot of money to have access to be totally honest. But they were unbelievable as far as like his hard hit rates. The swing and miss numbers were great. His ability to barrel the baseball, all of that stuff was fantastic. I think Fabian, maybe this is another bold prediction as well, but I would not be shocked if by the end of the year you have people asking, like, why is Judd Fabian not in the majors right now? I would not be shocked if that's happening. Is he going to make it to the majors next year? Most likely not. But I think you're going to have a lot of people online saying, get this guy up to the majors somehow because he's playing so well in AAA already in his, what would be his first full pro season.
Orioles fans demanding a minor leaguer to be brought up to the majors. I don't believe it. I almost said Dylan Beavers along the same lines, but I'm going with Kobe Mayo. I could just see him, he's very similar to Gunnar in that he's super young. You almost forget how young he is, to be able to get up to AA. Bowie to end last year. He's going to start back there. I could see him making a big leap as he, turns 21, is able to drink. And, you start drinking, you get superpowers. So I could see him forcing the issue towards the end of next year, kind of the way Gunnar did, if everything goes right. I think he has that ability to do that.
I'm going to take two guys who got drafted high and have pretty much been injured since the moment and are finally healthy. Anthony Servideo and Reed Trimble. I think both of these guys had some incredible skills, some traits that the Orioles loved when they drafted them. For Servideo, it's elite defense in the infield and the outfield, and it's the ability to hit for power, which he showed in that shortened season in Ole Miss. All of a sudden he started hitting homers right before the draft, and that's why the Orioles signed him. I got to, call his games in summer ball after his freshman year, and he was the best player on the field every single night. So I've been a big Servideo guy since then. And then Reed Trimble, I just think nobody's seen basically at all, except for those games in Delmarva this year when he finally came back. But I think he's a guy who has a lot of pop, can play the outfield really well, and I think is one of these like prototypical kind of Michael Elias picks in the outfield that we just haven't seen. And I think because of the advanced age, because of the injuries, especially for Servideo, I think both of these guys will easily be impact guys, at least in AA this year.
I'm going to say one of two guys, either Kobe Mayo or Heston Kjerstad. For one, I expect both to start at Bowie next year. And I think that Mayo was held back a little bit by that back injury he had over the summer. He missed a good bit of time there. So to get regular at-bats in AA for him is going to be big. And I think that one way or another, he starts to settle some questions about his defense. And then what makes Kjerstad interesting is strong finish to the season. Probably going to put him in Bowie, like I said. And just imagine if the Orioles, around the trade deadline, could use a left-handed bat off the bench. Does it make sense at that point to go out and acquire one from another team? Or is by that point, you're looking at Heston Kjerstad in Norfolk's outfield and thinking, if we could bring Kjerstad up for the last month of the season, there's that left-handed thump we could have there to play 2 or 3 days a week, pinch hit for us in certain situations. So if Kjerstad can stay healthy and continue to build on the progression he made over the last month at Aberdeen in the Arizona Fall League, I could see that happening. Different note here, which we'll go back to talking about free agent pitching, which this is a question from Tim Cook. Do you think a qualifying offer tied to a pitcher is a deal breaker for the Orioles? And I'll start with Bob.
There was actually some news recently that I think MLB Trade Rumors put out there that the Orioles, were one of the teams that if they do sign someone with a qualifying offer, it will not be their second highest pick. It will be the third highest pick that gets taken away from them. So I actually think that changes things. I think if it was, that top pick or that second best pick, I think it might have scared them away. But since it's only the third pick they have in the draft, plus they get the extra third round pick for not signing Nolan McLean, then I feel like they won't mind for the right guy. So, and Carlos Correa doesn't even have a qualifying offer attached to him. So if you go that route, you don't have to worry about it. But I think anyone like Trey Turner, even a Chris Bassett, who's not as big of a name, I think they'll go ahead and do it.
Yeah, I guess I don't think it's going to be a deal breaker like it probably was the last 2 years or so. But if all the data says like that's our guy, that we want him, then the Orioles, I think, are going to go get them. Like I mentioned, I feel like they were a lot more risky in the second half of last year's draft. So maybe we start to see that strategy play out a little bit more coming up. And, I look at it as the draft bonus pool. That's going to take a hit if you lose one of these picks. And we know the Orioles like to maximize that money. But at the same time, you're going to have a lot of these international guys start to trickle into AA next season and in the upper levels of the minor leagues. Delmarva Aberdeen rosters are going to be full of young international prospects. That international talent pipeline is really starting to build and starting to come up. And so I think that's going to help offset any losses you get in the amateur draft process. So if you have to lose a pick to go get that big free agent win now, then don't think twice about it.
I think if they're down to two guys and one has the qualifying offer and one doesn't, that may play a role just because they value the draft and Elias and company have been so good in the draft. But again, if their guy that they've been targeting has the qualifying offer, I don't think it'll stop them.
Yeah, I agree. I don't see it as a deal breaker either. And I'll go to this question here from Corey, which is, which pitchers do you think will move to the bullpen if the Orioles sign or trade for one or two starters? I'll start with Connor.
Yeah, so in terms of guys moving to the pen, I think Tyler Wells is kind of the easy answer. We've seen him do it in the bullpen already and have a lot of success. We've seen his stuff play up in the bullpen. He lost, I'm actually talking about this on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Orioles, is that he lost 2 miles per hour on his fastball pitching as a starter, and he still had success, but the stuff was not the same, and that was by design as well. And I think another guy is Mike Baumann. I'm surprised that he got as many chances to start as he did at the end of the year. I thought they would just keep him in a relief role, kind of projecting forward, but I think he's actually going to be on the Major League Opening Day roster as a reliever as well next year.
I agree with those. And I'd also say Austin Voth. I think he could be a really good swingman, 2-3 innings at a time, kind of that Keegan Aiken role from this past year. I feel like he could really excel at that under the tutelage of the pitching development on the Orioles. And I feel like maybe when John Means comes back and makes things even tighter, maybe Dean Kramer could move to the bullpen and hit that 100-mile-per-hour mark that he so desperately wants to hit.
Yeah, I got nothing to add to that. I think you guys nailed it. Voth and Tyler Wells are the two guys. I think Wells should move back to the bullpen. We talked about this last week, but yeah, both those guys I think you're going to see move to the pen. And as far as anyone else, I think he deserves every single opportunity to be a starter, but DL Hall, we've talked about this a lot as well. DL Hall has that electric stuff where if you think you can maximize his potential and his talents as a late inning guy or just a fireball out of the bullpen, then I'm fine with that as well.
Yeah, it's going to be someone in the group the three of you mentioned, because they're going to have to move someone to the bullpen with an eye of filling innings, especially early in the year, because I just don't think you're going to see Grayson Rodriguez or DL Hall on long leases for the first couple months of the season. So you're going to have to make up for that somewhere, and it's going to come from having an Austin Voth or a Tyler Wells or perhaps a Dean Kramer in a bullpen role. And we'll go to this question here from Cannon. Who is the most likely minor league reliever to make an impact in the majors next year? And I will start with Nick.
Easton Lucas. I'm going to throw the name out there again. Let's get the hype train rolling. He pitched all last season, but is still in Arizona right now where he's pitching pretty well. At least the numbers say he is. I wish we had more StatCast data out in Arizona, but other than his last outing, he's been pretty great. And I think MLB Pipeline that had a blurb about him in one of their articles saying there's some scouts in Arizona right now that think he could be a starter. He's got the big velo numbers, a deep arsenal. I think there's an outside shot that he could potentially even be like this year's Logan Gillespie, where he's a kind of a shocking add to the 40-man. roster ahead of the Rule 5 draft.
I'll jump in and I'll take a guy who's probably the easiest answer in a way because he's already on the 40-man roster, but I'll take Chris Vallimont in that role. I think just because of the stuff, high spin, high velocity fastball, like crazy spin on the breaking stuff. The Twins could not figure out how to get him to throw a strike. He came to Baltimore and almost immediately started throwing strikes in AA before he got moved up to Norfolk. And again, the results were mixed with the Tides. But I think if you can concentrate him to 1 to 2 innings, I think, if that is still on the Orioles 4-man come opening day, they have a plan for him to be on the big league roster next year because you don't claim a guy from AA and keep him on your 40-man all year if you don't think big things for him. And so I think Vallimant's going to be an impact reliever next year.
Yeah, that is a good call. And Noah Denoyer, who John in the chat mentioned, that's a fantastic answer as well. I thought about Easton Lucas, thought about Nolan Hoffman, thought about my guy, Adam Stauffer, but I'm going to go with Connor Loprich, who was just a guy that I was shocked that the team stuck with as long as they did when he was struggling. And then if you look at his second half last year, he was just whatever he was working on, it clicked because he had a fantastic second half. And obviously they see something they like, and maybe that will surprise us similarly to Logan Gillespie, as previously mentioned.
I think it's going to be Noah Denoyer. I could just see him stepping into that multi-inning relief role, and he's just got he's got really good stuff. He's got a good fastball, and while I don't think he's a direct comparison to Brian Baker in terms of what they bring, what their pitches look like and how they would necessarily, attack hitters, I could see him filling a similar role, which is maybe he is a guy that comes in the middle of the game and gives you 2+ innings to keep things close and try to keep your lineup in the game, or you are going to him in the 8th inning in a tight spot to get the ball to Felix Bautista. And we'll wrap up here with a question from Vivek. What can be learned from the Tigers and Marlins who went for it in 2022 and stumbled? Why or how are the Orioles different? And I'll start with Bob.
I think it just has to do with, I think the Orioles have a better core, and the core is offensively at the plate and on the field, because those teams are loaded with pitching talent, but pitching, there's such thing as a pitching prospect, there's injuries, all that stuff between Adley Rutschman, Gunnar Henderson. And the other thing is, I just feel like the Orioles have built such a wealth of depth that it might not work out for Jordan Westberg, but then you got Connor Norby right behind him, and if it doesn't work out with him, you got the next guy who's coming up. So I just feel like between the depth and the offensive core that it's just going to be easier to build around, and it's going to have a little bit more of a fail-safe than those two rebuilds had built in.
I think for that, it's an interesting question. It's something I've talked about on the podcast as well. I think, for the Tigers side, how I really look at the Tigers is they had a lot of Ramon Arias's and Jorge Mateos on that team in this lineup. Guys who, Mateo for this year had a little bit of a breakout. Arias last year had a little bit of breakout. And you went into the next year saying, oh, if all these guys keep breaking out and keep trending upward, we're going to have a great team. Well, they all obviously slid backwards in terms of kind of the fringe prospect hitters who were in the big leagues. And that was one of the worst offenses you're ever going to see, is what the Tigers threw out there next year. Obviously, it hurt that Spencer Torkelson was unplayable, and he was, your first-round draft pick 2 years ago, and he'll be better. But I think the Orioles aren't going to be relying on as many Mateos and Ariases. They just have one of each. They don't have 3 of each, which it seemed like the Tigers had. They have more backup in guys like Jordan Westberg and, Gunnar Henderson already being there and being a stud. And I think the other thing, too, about the Tigers, they signed a volatile guy to big money in Javier Baez. And just like the hitters that, tanked, he tanked too. And you knew it was a scenario. Now, they got very unlucky with the fact that Austin Meadows and Eduardo Rodriguez basically couldn't play all year. And those were 2 of their biggest signings through no fault of the team, bringing them in. On the Marlins side, they got, I feel like, kind of caught up in the moment signing Jorge Soler, who, had a big World Series, but wasn't good the whole season. And they watched him for 2 weeks and gave him $60 million. I don't think the Orioles are going to, I don't even know who the comparison would be to that in this year's World Series, but I don't think they're going to give Gene Segura like $20 million a year to come in this year. So I think that's the difference between them and the Marlins, the same thing. They just didn't have the hitting prospects at all that the Orioles have. But I think there's kind of your two biggest things, relying on too many Arias and Mateo type players, and then just signing the wrong free agents. I mean, you can't sign the Solers and the Baezes as your top free agent hitters because there's too much of a chance for both of those guys to tank, and they both did.
Got to be smart with this money.
What it comes back to for me is that the 2022 Orioles were better than both the 2021 Tigers and the 2021 Marlins. I mean, the Orioles won 83 games in a division that had 3 playoff teams in it, 2 of which won over 90 games. Now you're going to go to the schedule next season where you're not going to play the teams in your own division as much. I think that's going to help the Orioles out. The Tigers the year before started off ice cold, were actually one of the worst teams in baseball for a stretch, then got hot at the end of the year. But other than the White Sox, there really was not a good team in that division. So you had some room to build with there. The 2021 Marlins were pretty bad. And I don't think that they were good enough to dig their way out with Azavel Garcia and Jorge Soler, especially when they couldn't develop hitters. And the Tigers had a similar problem. And I know it's easy to say this in hindsight, but Spencer Torkelson was not ready. They rushed him to the major leagues. And there's not a Spencer Torkelson on the Orioles right now. Adley Rutschman has already shown he's ready for the major league level. Gunnar Henderson's going to have to take his adjustments and go through his lumps next year, but he's ready to play in the major leagues. You don't have that guy who you're going to put on the roster because it's more exciting and he could, in theory, make your team better, but we don't really know if he's ready for the major leagues or not. And that's just what it comes back to for me, is that the Orioles have a better roster going into the offseason. Either one of those two teams did. They have a better farm system with better hitters towards the top of the minors. And hopefully they follow that up with better offseason decisions than either one of those two teams made.
You mean being patient with some of the prospects might pay off? I'm going to go with coaching. I think without having super detailed knowledge of Detroit and Miami's systems, obviously, I just think that I'm going to hammer this every chance I get. I think every coach in this organization, from the DSL to the big leagues, they all seem to be on the same page. I loved a lot of the stories when we had Drew Rom on. He talked about, hey, we talked the arm slot thing. He's like, yeah, I was just messing around with it. And I went to the coaches and was like, hey, do you think this will work? And the coaches were like, sure, let's practice it. Let's feel this out a little bit. And then, use it in the game. Let's see if it works. So I think the coaches are willing to listen to the players. Learning and development, I think, is a two-way street in this organization. So I love that. I think when players and writers themselves talk about the coaches in the system, you hear all these big traits, the former teachers, and all the traits that, as a former teacher myself, you hear a lot of these traits that make teachers stand out above the rest. You hear that with these coaches. And I think there's just a pitching and hitting development philosophy in place in this organization. The Orioles think they have the secret sauce that's going to work in baseball right now. We know that can change. Baseball changes, but they think they have the secret sauce right now to be successful and give them an advantage. And they've got the right people in place. And you're seeing guys like Ryan Fuller in the major leagues now. We talked last week, Cody Ashe getting moved up, his new role, help ease that transition as these prospects move up. And it's just all one big train moving in the same direction.
The Yves Rosenbaum quote is just ringing in my head all offseason or all postseason. This is a player development powerhouse. Let's hope that's true.
Well, thank you to our listener for submitting some excellent questions tonight. And on top of that, with our predictions, we had a lot of good offseason talk with Connor Newcomb, the co-host or the host of Locked On Orioles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Connor, before we wrap up tonight, tell our listeners what you have coming up. You also run one of the stronger Orioles Twitter accounts that there is. So make sure our listeners know where to find you there.
Yeah, you can check us out on Twitter at Locked On Orioles. You can get the Locked On Orioles podcast wherever you listen to pods. We're also on YouTube as well. We're sticking daily up through the winter meetings, actually. So still a month more of Monday through Friday podcasts, audio and video as well. Coming up on Tuesday, we're going to review Tyler Wells' season and kind of get into some of the conversation we talked about with him today, which is basically, depending on what the Orioles do in the offseason, is he going back to the bullpen or can he hold on to a starter's role next year? He's definitely an interesting piece and talk about, if I'm worried at all about, the multiple different injuries that he sustained in 2022. But yeah, today I just put out my big offseason preview for the Orioles, went through basically everything that could possibly happen this offseason for the O's. And I'm excited for Thursday, 5 p.m. Eastern time is when free agents can start being signed. And what I really want is, even if the O's don't sign someone on Thursday, if we can get a Rosenthal or a Passan tweet or a Nightingale tweet that just mentions the Orioles on Thursday, that's going to be just so much more fun than the last 5 or so years have been.
Well, Connor, we look forward to hearing more from you this offseason. So thank you for coming on tonight.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
As for us here at On the Verge, we will be back next Monday night with a preview of the Orioles' decisions relating to the 40-man roster and the Rule 5 draft. That deadline is coming up at the end of next week. Which players do we expect the Orioles to protect? Which ones could be left unprotected and be heading for the Rule 5 draft? We'll get into that on our show next Monday night at 8 o'clock. In the meantime, follow us on Twitter at BSL on the Verge and check out BaltimoreSportsAndLife.com for all the latest coverage on the Orioles, Ravens, college sports, and more. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens and our guest Connor Newcomb, this is Zach Sped, and you've been listening to On the Verge.
That'll do it for this week's episode of On the Verge. Be sure to check out our Patreon page where you can help show your support for the show and get bonus content, including monthly top 50 updates to our prospect list and daily game recaps during the season, and much, much more.